Four nations are facing off. I am finally back from Florida. A whole lot to get to on today's edition of Locked On Oilers.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Wednesday edition of Locked On Oilers. I'm your host, Nick Zararis. I want to thank everyone who's making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On today's show, wide-ranging conversation about the Four Nations face-off so far. Going to break it down into our usual three segments. Going to start the overview, why this is working, why the NHL has hit a home run, the games themselves, then the Oilers' perspective. So, getting to the big picture. I talked about this extensively last week on the Four Nations Face-Off preview episode. This was a golden opportunity for the NHL to get marquee players in front of an audience that is not typically hockey watching. And look, the good thing about these types of moments, these type of spectacles, is that they can both cater to a casual audience, someone who's flicking channels or is tangentially invested in sports, and they can appeal to the hardcore fan. And everybody I have talked to since last Wednesday has loved every last minute of this. I was very excited when this event got announced last year, when they just announced, the four players on each team who are going to be the locks. And I am absolutely ecstatic that things have worked out. And there are questions, guys getting dinged up, which isn't great. You never want players getting hurt, especially in games they're not getting paid for, that aren't for their teams, that aren't in the playoffs. You worry about lingering injuries. Charlie McAvoy of the Bruins in particular, somebody who's not going to be able to play on Thursday, admitted to the hospital for an upper body injury. That's concerning, something you don't want to see stem from this. But at large, this has been a resounding success. And I would be remiss if I did not address the geopolitical consequences of the world right now and why the culture war that is permeating, unfortunately, every single aspect of life is coming to the NHL. And look, I can sit here and tell you a lot of this stuff is nonsense. In particular, I don't think the fact that the Americans had started 3 fights within the first 9 seconds of the game did a whole lot for the game itself as far as helping them win, leading them to victory, being a driving force. Was it entertaining? Yeah. Anytime you get that type of chaotic atmosphere, that's exciting. Do I think the Tkachuk brothers and JT Miller wanted to get themselves involved and to set the tone or to send a message? Yeah. I think those types of guys like to play with emotion. They need to fire themselves up in a fight. That's an easy way to get your adrenaline going and start things up for your team. I have no problem with that. I think reading too deeply into, and we'll talk about the games themselves coming up in the next segment. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but the culture war aspect of this is bad. You don't want people using hockey to make people feel bad about themselves. You don't want people using hockey to make broad sweeping statements about groups of people. You never want to do that. That is always bad. You don't want to use something like hockey that's supposed to be a means of bringing everyone together as a means of driving people apart. I think anybody trying to make a hockey game more than it is trying to rile people up and excite the wrong types of people. And look, am I naive to the role of patriotism and nationalism in international sports? Of course not. Of course, those entities are inherently political. USA Hockey is a federally funded program. Team Canada is a Canadianly federally funded program. The Swedes, the Finns, those federations get money from their national federal governments. I am not naive to the role of sport in propaganda. The Summit Series back in the 70s, Team USA beating the Russians in 1980. I am not naive to that aspect of it, that people can use sports as a wedge issue, as something to make other people feel inferior. And I was having a conversation with one of my friends today on the way back. I was in the car for a lot of the last 2 days, so I've spent a lot of time thinking, writing. And one thing I wanted to hit on in this episode: sports are not inherently political. There is nothing political about an American team playing a Canadian team in international hockey. But the stakeholders of the world, the leaders, the rich people who payroll and bankroll campaigns, those people have deemed most aspects, if not all aspects of life, inherently political. So as much as I would like to not talk about politics, as much as I would like to just talk about the hockey, the stakeholders have determined we can't do that because it fuels some part of their agenda. So we have to talk about it with that backdrop. And I think we have reached a really interesting point in that Team USA versus Team Canada physiology, the makeup of those teams, because we've reached a different point. The NHL is continuing to diversify where it draws players from as far as country, and that is a good thing. You always want to highlight your best players. And yeah, there are federations like the Russians, the Czechs, the Swiss, the Germans, who all have arguments that they should have gotten an opportunity to participate in something like this and will in the Olympics. Russia is to be determined, but that's a different political conversation. But all of this is working out for the NHL. The league is getting its desired outcome. It's getting Team USA versus Team Canada for a second time in the span of a week. The first game last Saturday was a resounding success. It drew 5 million viewers in the United States at its peak, 9 million something viewers up in Canada. That is an astronomical number for a hockey game in the United States, and frankly, just North America at large. When you add those numbers up, that is a resounding endorsement from the viewing public that what you did is working. Because the NHL, especially down here in the States, has really struggled to connect with that casual audience. And international hockey, very much like the World Cup, very much like the Olympics, it is a means of bridging that gap to the casual fan. The casual fan probably isn't going to throw on Oilers Kraken at 10:15 on East Coast time on a Tuesday. But if Connor McDavid's playing and Sidney Crosby's playing and the Kachuk brothers and Jack Hughes, okay, and it's a Saturday night, I'm at the bar, this is on. Oh, they're fighting right off the rip as soon as the game starts? Okay, now I'm invested. These guys care. This isn't just an exhibition. Okay, that is why you are seeing ESPN in particular highlight this tournament rather, on its various properties, whether that's Get Up, PTI, Sports Center, etc., when ESPN usually doesn't give hockey the time of day. And I don't necessarily think that conversation and engagement is the sole driver of or indicator of what quality is, but I do think there's something here. There's something to build upon. So speaking of that, we're actually going to talk about the hockey in our next segment. So be sure to stick around to this edition of Locked On Oilers, where we've got you covered every day. Looking for a wonderful snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios are one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats that help you keep feeling fuller longer. Personally, I love the no-shell variety. You heard me. I've been on a road trip for each of the last 2 days, picked them up at gas stations more than once, or, I take my fitness very seriously. I'm going to go to the gym as soon as I'm done recording this episode. And if I need a quick protein fix to try and get my macros for the day, Wonderful Pistachios are the best way to do it. Or if you're traditional, you're old school, you want to crack open the shell for that satisfying sound, the in-shell options are a classic favorite. Get snackin' and get crackin' with the snack that packs a protein punch. Is a wonderful Pistachios to learn more. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out here on this Wednesday edition of Locked On Oilers as we are breaking down the Four Nations face-off. So, as far as the actual hockey, I have been astounded by the high-end talent. And there are different benchmarks I kind of look at as far as quality of play. And one of the real telltale signs you're watching good hockey is when no one looks out of place. When it looks like every single player on the ice knows exactly what they're doing it, and they're doing it well. That's one of the real benchmarks. There's no polar bear in Arlington, Texas out there on the ice. There's no 11th or 12th forward or 6th defenseman who just looks woefully out of their depth. Up and down all of these lineups, and look, are the Finns and Swedes as talented as USA or Canada? No. Those teams are still unworldly talented. You know, Sweden was managed very weirdly. I did want to hit on this, being that this is tied to the Oilers directly. Ekholm not getting a featured role, Arvidsson not getting as much ice time as he probably should have. I was a little frustrated with Sweden's management of their lineup overall. You know, Mika Zibanejad playing the most minutes of anyone in that first game against Canada. Rasmus Dahlin getting less ice time than Jonas Brodin. I was definitely frustrated with Sweden's management of their lineups, probably the most of the four federations. Some of these teams, their options a bit more limited. Guys are injured, not able to. But the crux of the conversation around this tournament has been around the Americans and the Canadians. I do want to talk about Finland, Sweden just a smidge, because I do want to do those teams justice. They are talented. They did hang around. Every team in this tournament did win a game. I think for Finland, getting the goaltending situation squared away would have helped them immensely. Saros is having a very weird year. He hasn't been great. He has the track record of a goalie that's better than he's played this year. I would like to think he's capable of better, but in a short tournament, I don't blame their coach trying to ride the hot hand to find something to get going. Finland, it's always going to be an uphill battle for them. They are a defense first, 200-foot federation. They're going to try and wear you down, play very reminiscent to what Carolina does, what Florida does, what Dallas does. It's not a coincidence. All three of those teams are heavily featured on Finland. As for Sweden, I think they're in an in-between where their next wave of young guys, you know, Raymond, Leo Carlson, they're not quite ready to handle the team, take control of the team. That Victor Hedman, Eric Carlson, Zibanejad, a wave of guys is still very much the outward-facing face of this team, for lack of a better word. I think William Nylander is a good bridge between those two generations. I think Nylander is still, frankly, very underrated on a league-wide basis. I think a lot of people associate him, Austin Matthews, and Mitch Marner consistently with losing, with coming up short in big spots. And I don't think that's a fair characterization of any of them. I know I am maybe in the minority. I still defend all three of those guys. I think all of them are supremely talented hockey players. And I think a lot of people are just unwilling to accept how much luck goes into a best of 7 playoff series. And if you want to say they can't get it done in a big moment, they're chokers, whatever, that's great and all. When I watch William Nylander, I see one of the 15, 20 best players in the entire sport. I don't think that's a crazy exaggeration. Mitch Marner, I think, has pretty consistently been a top 15 forward in the NHL between the counting stats, between the defense. I think both of them are supremely talented. Matthews has done a remarkable job for the Americans. Him and Jack Hughes did an absolutely tremendous job against Connor McDavid in the head-to-head, the USA-Canada game last Saturday. I thought those guys in particular did a great job of using their speed to try and take away lanes, to force Canada to dump the puck in, to try and settle for dump and chase, grind it out, point shot hockey, which isn't what Canada wants to do. At least they're high-end guys. You know, if you want to talk about the Konechny's, the Brandon Hagels of the world, sure. Seth Jarvis, the bottom six for Canada, a little more dump and chase, grind it out style. That's how you have to break down what America did so well. And we'll pivot the second half of the segment to talking about the game last Saturday. We'll do more of this conversation tomorrow ahead of the game, ahead of the final. But the things that really stuck out to me from that game last Saturday, number one, America played really good defense. And one of the telltale ways a team is playing good defense is when you see people who work in hockey media saying the other team is playing too much East-West. With all due respect to Chris Johnston, Pierre LeBrun, all of the talking media heads who have carved out decades-long careers in the NHL landscape by being knowledgeable, by knowing the right people. If Nathan McKinnon and Connor McDavid and Sidney Crosby and Braden Point, if those guys are going east-west, that tells you there's no room through the middle. That's telling you the other team is playing good defense. And yes, Team USA is afforded the luxury of having Connor Hellebuck, who's been the best goalie in the NHL in the regular season this year. That is a really, really, really impactful player. That said, if Team Canada is trying to create to their strength, through the neutral zone with speed, and that was something the Americans did a really good job of, was even if McDavid or McKinnon was galloping through the neutral zone with speed, they were doing a really good job of diverting them away from the slot towards the wall. Because if you can keep even the best players in the world to the outside and force them to work hard for their offense, that starts to wear on them and that frustrates them. And it's something you can't really prevent. If you're Canada and you keep getting corralled to the outside and you're settling for point shots and you're settling for flank shots and trying to force passes through the middle to set up one-timers, it's hard to do. And as that game goes along, you start to grip your stick a little bit tighter. You start to miss time certain reads, whether it's your shot or your pass, and your timing gets messed up. I thought the States did a really good job of forcing Canada to play a smidge faster than they wanted to. I got to give credit to Jack Hughes, somebody whose defense is consistently maligned because he does not look like a defensive player. He typically doesn't play great defense, but one of the important components of these best-on-best tournaments is good players being in specialized roles. Team USA is playing JT Miller, who plays 22, 23 minutes a night for the Rangers on its third line, and he's killing penalties. He's being tasked with forechecking, with cycling, with playing defense, as opposed to what he's doing in New York, where he's expected to score a ton. He's expected to play good defense. And in these tournaments, you need your specialized guys to succeed. I would be remiss if I didn't mention how much Team Canada could have used Evan Bouchard last Saturday. No Cale Makar. Thomas Harley drew in, and he did a good job. I thought Thomas Harley was really, really good for Canada. I hope Thomas Harley plays on Thursday over maybe a he's injured, over a Colton Parayko or a Travis Sanheim. And look, I thought Sanheim was fine. I don't think he was the issue. I just think Thomas Harley fits what the environment of that game is. I think he's a lot better in transition. I think he's a lot more functional as far as getting the puck where it needs to go. But all of that said, man, you know what? I'm going to save it. I'm going to save that point for the next segment to keep you enticed to keep watching. There's a whole lot more to talk about as far as Canada and the USA and the Four Nations face-off coming up next, so be sure to stick around. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out here on this Wednesday edition of Locked On Oilers. Yes, I am back from Florida after a week in the sun. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see the sunburn on my neck's not as bad, but the entire right side of my body got pretty badly sunburnt Thursday. Very fun weekend. I'm very glad I was able to watch the Four Nations games. I did not get to watch all of them, but for the most part, the Canadian games and the US games, I have seen the majority of all of them. Went back and watched the Canada-USA game. I was able to watch it on my phone while I was in the car yesterday and try and get it freshly in my brain because I wanted to talk about it authoritatively and really have talking points to hit you guys with, because I feel that these games have been a great representation of where hockey's going. And I don't mean that in terms of player. I just mean in terms of style. I think fundamentally, any team that is still kind of stuck in a hockey player is this mindset, I think you are fundamentally missing where the game is going. And I think when you look at a team like the Americans that can feature a Jack Eichel and a Jack Hughes, I think that very clearly shows you there is no one size fits all as far as hockey player. I think the fact that guys like Jack Hughes, not Jack Hughes, excuse me, guys like Vincent Trocheck, JT Miller, Brock Nelson, Chris Kreider, Seth Jarvis, Travis Konechny, Brandon Hagel, Sam Bennett, those grinded out types that are so heavily relied upon in the postseason, that these federations both picked guys with those specialities in terms of skill sets over just more overall talented players. The Americans, they could have brought Tage Thompson or Cole Caulfield. The Canadians, they could have brought Mark Scheifele. There were significantly more just straightforward skill set guys, and both federations said, we want to have some variety. We want to have guys who can do a little bit different things depending on how the game is going. And as far as the Oilers, I would have loved Evan Bouchard to have gotten a look here for two reasons. Number one, I think frankly he's just better than Travis Sanheim. I think he's probably better. Oh, what am I saying? He's better than Colton Parayko too. I really wanted Bouchard on this team for that reason. And number two, this entire endeavor is a precursor to next year's Winter Olympics. And you want these guys getting familiar with each other now, because next year you are going to be in a lot more real of an environment. And look, I commend the NHL for doing this. I am ecstatic it is working to the degree it is. I have loved every last minute of this. I'm going to be sad when the clock hits 000 on Thursday. I hope it is every bit as good as I'm going to hype it up to be tomorrow. But the Olympics have a different tenor. When those rings are on the line, when the gold medal is up for grabs, you want to have every advantage you feasibly can, and you want guys to have familiarity with each other. Who's playing with who, what situations, what specialities. Are we going to rely on the fact that Olympic ice is a little bit bigger? Or how are we going to change our team for the fact that the Olympic ice is bigger and there's no fighting and the rules are a little bit different as far as IHF is versus NHL? I know there was jokingly, I think, well, maybe Canada needs to bring Tom Wilson next year. Look, Tom Wilson's having a great year for the Capitals this year. Tom Wilson does not belong on an Olympic Canadian team. He's not the type of player you want to bring. If you want to bring the Sam Bennett, Brandon Hagels of the world, the grind cycle forecheck, sure. Tom Wilson and the extracurricular stuff, that doesn't play in the IIHF world. The ice is bigger. The speed and mobility are significantly more important than size and grit. And look, I hope the NHL takes good lessons from this. Number one, we can't beat this into the ground. We cannot do this every year. We are unfortunately going to have to go back to an all-star game. This is special right now because we have not had best on best hockey with NHL players since 2016 when we had the World Cup of Hockey. And that was not a full scope World Cup of Hockey because we had 6 federations and then Team North America and Team Europe. If you want to get real buy-in and you want to build on this progress as a league, as a players association, because they are partners in this entity, we need to get this on the Copa America Euros / World Cup cycle. If you're not familiar, in the soccer world, the World Cup is every 4 years and it's in an even year. The World Cup will be next year, 2026. I'm very excited for that. Last summer, we had the Euros and Copa America 2024, and those are regional international tournaments. Copa America is North and South America, Euros, Europe. The NHL has the opportunity to do something similar here. If we say the Olympics are 2026 and 2030, we run a World Cup of hockey in 2028. Now, I think it would be better if the NHL ran their World Cup of hockey in place of an All-Star game as opposed to the start of the season. Like in 2016, they ran the World Cup of hockey before the regular season started, and I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with that. I just think the quality of play would be better if we ran this tournament in season, because guys have a couple months of regular season hockey under their belt and they're not coming in cold from the summer and like a week of training camp to expecting to be at their absolute best. Because as we talk about a ton here on Locked On Oilers, you're trying to build up, you're trying to ramp yourself up throughout the course of a season so that by the time the big games come, you are materially prepared, you're focused, you're locked in, and you know what you need to do to be successful. And I am so happy everything has worked out. And the last thing I want to touch on before we get out of here, if you're a Bruins fan and you're upset Charlie McAvoy's hurt, if you're a Leafs fan, you're worried about Austin Matthews, if you're a Panthers fan worried about Matthew Tkachuk, I understand, and those are valid. You know, I am worried that McDavid's going to take a funky bounce at some point in the game on Thursday, and the Oilers are absolutely screwed if that happens. If you are a fan of any team that has players participating in this tournament, I understand your apprehension. It's valid. You are entitled to be worried. You know, I am watching all of these games hopeful that every time there's a check, both guys get up fine and there's no lingering issues. You know, that McAvoy hit on McDavid that ABC played a million times and TNT played a million times last night before the US-Sweden game, I was a little worried that McDavid wasn't going to get up. Thankfully he did, and everything was fine and there were no issues. But you hope everyone stays right. You hope we get to keep talking about the hockey, because ultimately that's what this is about. This is a celebration of the sport, of what hockey can be at its absolute best. That's what you're watching every time you see one of these best on best tournaments. You are watching the best players in the world collaborate with each other, take small sacrifices, playing time, their responsibilities, their roles in pursuit of a shared goal. And I think it's a really beautiful testament to what hockey is at its purest. You know, hockey is the ultimate team game. If a player gets hurt during the course of the game, you don't get to put someone in off the bench, you know, like the other sports. It is the guys on the bench and your backup goalie. That's what you got. Someone goes down, all right, we got to fill that in. Or we don't have a spot and we're going to play. We're playing with 17 now, and someone's going to have to fill in those minutes. And that's what makes hockey special. I cannot wait for the game. I'll have more tactics, ideas, matchups as far as what to look out for ahead of the game tomorrow on Thursday. But I wanted to do a Cliff Notes run through of my thoughts about the tournament so far, being that I've been away. Very glad to be back in the swing of things. I will talk to you guys tomorrow ahead of the gold medal game. See you guys then. If you could be so kind, please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please leave the show a 5-star review. If you're watching over on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, hit the alarm bell. I will talk to you guys tomorrow. See you guys then.